played tomorrow night against Leeds at home. Are you fit? So I said, yeah, I suppose so. So he said, well, I don't want you to play centre half. He said, because McCarthy was all right on Saturday. I want you to play left half and just mark John Charles, you see. So I said, all right. And the cricket boys were playing at Dover. Anyway, we started the game, and John Charles, I think he played centre forward. But anyway, as I was told to mark him, I thought, well, I better get to him straight away. Passed the ball straight from the kick-off back to the right half. And John Charles ran straight to the outside left position. They played a long ball. And I tackled him, slid under him as it were, and my shoulder went up.
Yeah.
So the game wasn't 30 seconds old. And I was off the pitch. And all the cricket players travelled up from Dover at the end of play and got there 10 minutes after the game started and couldn't figure out where I was. So they lost that one 2-1, and then Jimmy C got the sack after 5 games. Yeah. We got beaten 8-1 at Sunderland or something.
At the end of that season,
and we went down
Division 2.
That's right.
So where could we sort of just to start off take things right back to the beginning? Charlton, were they the only club that you played for professionally?
Yeah.
And what about pre-Charlton? How did you come to be
Pre-Charlton,
involved with?
Well, I went to Dartford Grammar School. I came from Crayford, and I went to Dartford Grammar School, and it was in the war. And I don't think I'd even played in a football match. There might have been 2 or 3 games at the school that I went to in Barnhurst, which they weren't against other schools because we always complained. We had football posts in the school grounds, but we never ever played in other schools, so we never played in a football match. And I think the first, when I was about 12, we didn't have any rugby games. It was a rugby school, but because we were in a defence area, people couldn't come into Dartford because we were too near the coast.
It's sensitive.
And so the other schools, so we only played Gravesend and I think HMS Worcester. So we only had 4 games of rugby. So I started organising little football matches down in a park in Dartford, and getting 22 guys, and the one of the masters used to referee for us, and I suppose that I was the best player, as it were. The master used to say to me, "Where did you learn to play football?" And he'd say, "Well, I just love it, and I've never played." Anyway, this guy was terrific, really, and and we got a team from the school, and he got in trouble with the headmaster because we were a rugby school. But he got a team from the school from 18 downwards, and we played with 1 or 2 of the other dads did it, although my father wasn't involved because I was much too young. So they formed this team, and they went in the Dartford Minor League, and they called themselves Borough Juniors, because this master, he's still alive actually, he writes to me, from Middlesbrough, and because of the borough situation, and Dartford was a borough and Bexley Heath was a borough, so they called it Borough Juniors. And we did well, and I was the youngest by far. I was just 13 when they started, and I got dropped after a while because 13 against 18, and I was a bit wary. But they did very well and finished 2nd in the league, and I think won a cup and I think we won the Kent Minor Cup in the end when I was about 50. And then I suppose people said I could play a bit, and they started coming, but nobody took any interest. Until I was in the army, and Jimmy Hill and I were the only 2. The rest of those in the team of pros, we were the only 2 amateurs. And Ted Drake, who was manager at Reading then, I saw him last night, funnily enough, asked us both to go there when we got demobbed for a 2-month trial, which I didn't fancy very much, although Jimmy finished up going there for a 2-month trial, which was extended for a whole season. But I didn't fancy that very much, and I went down for a trial at Cardiff, and they said, well, we'll sign you pro when you get demobbed. And then, as I say, Jimmy and I got demobbed on the same day, and he went to Reading that following Monday, and I was going to have a week off before I went to Cardiff, and my mother had been killed in the war in actual fact, and I was an only child, so I thought I'd better spend a bit of time with my dad if I was going to go and live in Cardiff. And Malcolm Allison, who was a pal of mine, and he grew up in Dartford as well, or Bexley Heath, I met him on the Saturday night after I'd been demobbed on the Thursday, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to Cardiff." He said, "Do you want to go there?" And I said, "Not really." He said, "Well, I'll get you a trial at Charlton," which he did, and they took me.
This would have been when, about 48, would it be?
48, yeah.
So he was already there.
He was at Charlton,
Yeah.
that's right. He left 50, I suppose. Early 50s he would have left. He played... I got in the side first. It was a bit upsetting, really, because we were together all the time, you know. I mean, we travelled together and all that sort of thing. And then they picked me at left half in 49, and Malcolm was sort of reserved to Harold Phipps as centre half, and thought he should have been in the side. And then Harold Phipps got injured, and they played a fellow called Bicknell, and it nearly broke Malcolm's heart, really. And then to cap that, I got in the side, and Malcolm didn't, just after Bicknell had been playing, and so Malcolm was heartbroken, really.
Yeah.
And
understandably so, really, I suppose.
anyway, I got in the side around about October, and he picked Malcolm the 2 Christmas games against Manchester City. We lost them both, I think, and he blamed Malcolm and sold him straight away to West Ham. And West Ham, I mean, he got in the side. They were second division though, West Ham, but it makes a bit of... Malcolm was a terrific player, tremendous skills, but I mean, you just got to have pace in the game. You've got to have pace. Even then, I mean, you had to have pace. And Malcolm was a galloper, really. He didn't sort of, you know, those vital yards. He couldn't quite make up quick enough, really.
Yeah.
But a tremendous player. He wouldn't like me to say that about him in actual fact, because he always felt that he was
up there with the rest.
Yeah, really. But, well, because of his skills, rightly so, really.
So when you had this trial with Charlton and Jimmy Seed signed you up more or less straight away.
Yeah.
What was it like joining such a club that has such a tremendous amount of success,
Yeah.
usually pre-war and post-war?
Well, I'd
as
always
well?
been a supporter, you know. I mean,
You
as a
had.
kid, I'd always
Yeah.
gone there. My dad had always taken me on the train from Slade's Green, from Bath. So I'd started watching them pre-war with Sammy was in goal, and I was standing on the line behind Sammy. And we always went in the same place, you know.
Whereabouts? You always not the cover down the other end, were you?
That's right, yeah. Look, sitting in the stand, it would be on the right, and it would be just to the right of the goal. And we always made for that spot. And I was there in that spot when the 76,000 with Aston Villa, which was the top gate, whatever anybody else says, that was the top gate. And I was there that day, and that, you know, everybody was passed over, which was quite true, and we all sat on the line. And I mean, it was very, very near to Sammy. He used to say to Sammy, "You don't know how close I was to you." and he used to spit a lot, Sammy, and I used to say, "I used to think you were disgusting." And so that was 12, well that was 36 I suppose. I think that cup match may have been 38.
Yeah, the Villa match was.
But I started going 36, Everton was the first game. And so it was another 12 years before I sort of signed on and got to know Sammy. And of course in those days, I mean, there were 48 pros, you know, so I mean...
That's one of the things that amazes me when I see the team, the squad shots.
That's right.
And the playing staff is so huge. I mean,
well, and that's everybody said what happened to the money they used to take in those days because of the... But you see, Charlton only had 3,000 seats, less than 3,000 seats in that stand. I think it was 2,800 and something.
Yeah.
And in those days, the away team got half the standing gate, but only sixpence from every seat. So if Charlton filled the ground and had 3,000 seats, say, they gave 3,000 sixpences to the opposition. But they gave half of everything they took on the rest. So if they had 76,000 people there, they gave half of 73,000 to the opposition. Whereas if you went to Highbury, even in those days, they would be collecting sixpence of 30,000 seats, well not 30,000 seats, but at least 15,000 seats, and half of the other 15,000.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, they came to Charlton and they get more than they would have got from a home game themselves in a funny sort of way. So Charlton never ever made that much money, really.
They did have the opportunities, certainly in the 30s, to improve the ground.
Oh yeah, I mean that is 30 years of neglect. Well, when you say they did improve the ground in the 30s, but they didn't improve it from the 50s.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't improve it after the war at all. And it was exactly the same. Well, when I say not at all, they did, but they made a terrible mistake. Because the stand used to be one of those stands where it was built up in the front, so people used to stand in the front of the stand, like the far terrace at Crystal Palace, if you like, that type of thing. So they thought they'd be clever and put more seats in, so they put seats right down to the ground floor. So if you sat in those front 3 rows, one, you got soaking wet, but 2, you couldn't see that much of the game anyway because you were too low. So they lost all the people who used to stand in front of it, and they didn't really benefit from the seats. So by making that mistake, they thought, oh, well, they'd leave it. And the next thing they did was probably, I don't know, was it in the 60s when they put seats in that? No, it would have been later than that, wouldn't it?
Well, the Jimmy C stand was opened.
Which is the Jimmy C stand?
That was the newest stand. It was opened in the beginning of the 80s, wasn't it? So the
was
covered end would
right.
have been one on the right of the grandstand. This covered end would have been seated, I don't know.
See, I thought that was a mistake. I mean, I still argue a little bit with Richard Collins, who was on the board at that time. I mean, there were a certain element of Charlton who wanted to stand behind that goal, and they didn't want seats for them, really. And then they took them 5 years to build the other covered end, didn't they? Because they couldn't get the stanchions in the ground for some reason. Terrible situation. So, I mean, whatever the situation's about leaving the valley, I mean, in a funny sort of way, although I didn't agree with it in any sort of way, there was some justification. You know, I mean, GLC cutting out the far side, and Michael Dixting wanting his side back. And I suppose if you own the place and you think, well, am I going to get my money back? You just say, well, I'm not. Or not own the place, but paying that lease, you know, to Flickstream, and you start to say, well, why should I spend £1 million and I'm never going to own it?
Well, it was that period in the early mid-80s when the club was very close to being wound up, weren't they? And
well, I mean, that, you see, Michael Glicksting just had enough. I mean, I've known him since I was a kid, and he was younger than me, but he was in all the team photographs with me. So you get a certain rapport with somebody. And I, as much as you could argue with him, Michael, I would have argued with him, but you can't. He's not the type of person you can argue with. He's always right, you know, sort of thing, especially when he owns the club and he doesn't want advice, you know, or didn't want advice. He was right, so you couldn't argue with him. But at the end, he just had enough. It would have been costing him money, no doubt about that. It would have been costing him money. Whatever people say about selling Lenny Glover and Mike Bailey and Billy Bonds, if it's costing you 200,000 a year, which now might be 2 million a year because of inflation and so on and so forth, but if it's costing you 200,000 a year, in those days that was an unbelievable amount of money, and somebody says, well, there's 50,000 of it back. Very hard not to take it because you can't see any other way you're ever going to get it back.
The break-even gate at the valley was actually quite high, wasn't it? They
never ever got it. I mean, the gates collapsed very early. I mean, whatever anybody says about we had great support and was 70,000, you only got 70,000 a few times.
Yeah.
And in the early 50s, when Stewie Leary and I were playing, once the tram stopped, funny enough, I mean, it sounds stupid, but once the tram stopped, which used to run every 30 seconds, you know, they used to wallop along and people would literally be hanging on the sides when the game, they used to bring thousands of people. And I can remember we played Stoke City one day, and we got 22,000. And the papers the next day, Charlton's gate slumps to 22,000, you know. So everybody else in the first division got 35 or more, but we had 22. And from then on it just went down and down and down until you used to go in the dressing room, and the boot room was at the end of the dressing room, and at the end of the boot room was the computer, where you could see how many people were coming in.
Did it click?
That's right. Clicked up, and the old numbers coming up. And all of us used to go in there and say, Jesus, look at that, half an hour ago, there's only 3,000 people in the ground, you see. And we got down to about 14,000, and I can remember saying to Stuart Leary, I'm not even going on that field unless there's 14,000 people here, you know. And we used to go and we used to watch this thing clocking round, and we used to say, 10 minutes to kick off, still only 8,000, no, I'm not going to even bloody play today. And it gradually got worse and worse. So, and I finished in 1960, 59 was my last game in the first day. So I'm definitely talking 1950s now, so it's a little bit of a myth when they say that if we weren't at Crystal Palace, we'd have thousands of people at Charlton.
Absolutely, but I mean, there are other factors to take into consideration. For example, there was second division football, and then through the 60s, it was periods in the 70s, third division football, even the early 80s, third division
We
football.
were still in the first, you see. I mean, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
We were down to 22 in 1952, and we still had 4 more seasons in the first, so it had gone.
Yeah.
The last game in the second division, the first season we went down, they had 58,000 to see us play Blackburn, and we lost. We'd have drawn, we'd have gone back up.
Yeah.
There were 58,000 in that day, but since then it never ever got. And of course they sold off a part of one side for those flats on the right. So that reduced the capacity. And the capacity when we left was 9,000, with a committed capacity. So, where were we going to put them if we played Spurs in the Cup, sort of thing? We wouldn't have been able to get them in. And if you play Portsmouth, and you've got to be segregated. And if you play Leeds, and you've got to be segregated. And there was only one turnstile left. One, you couldn't get them in, and two, there was nowhere to put them in if you got them in. So there were all sorts of terrible problems.
It seems.
We wouldn't have left if it hadn't been for the Sundays, But we would have had terrible, terrible problems. And I don't think we'd have got in the first division.
It's very strange how. Now there's only really Steve Gritt left from the side who played regularly at the Valley. John Humphreys and Mark Reed started there, but they weren't there very long.
That's right.
So most of the players, it's
that's amazing. I hadn't thought about that. Steve is the only one, isn't he? Yeah.
I can't think of anyone else. There might be a couple of those who played a few games there, but not many. Certainly not many.
No, Humphreys and Reed would be the only two left. We bought Pearson, he's gone, hasn't he? And who else did he play? What about 6, didn't he? I can't remember the others either.
But obviously a game that comes to mind to a lot of supporters will talk about is obviously the Huddersfield match. But you had the misfortune of going off after about 10 minutes, didn't you? And you had bronze 20 minutes. You had bronze on your shoulders.
Yeah.
Was that continually dislocating?
Yeah, it was just one of those things. I was very lucky with my legs.
Yeah.
Never got an injury really. Maybe a 2-week or 3-week ankle or knee, but never an injury that kept me out. But my shoulders just both of them, it wasn't just one. And
was there an instant that sort of started that off, or was it just?
Yes, in the army, a guy I was running through. When you play in matches when perhaps you're young and you don't realise that. Sounds terrible, but you're better than the others because it's a very minor sort of game. And when you're young, you don't realise, you just play the best you can. So you've got the ball and nobody seems to be stopping you, and you're running faster and faster and faster, and think, geez, it's good. And somebody just stuck his foot out. And it was very hard ground, and I can remember going up and up and up, and I was running so fast, and I landed on it, and it was at Farnborough, and they had to take me to Aldershot to the hospital. I remember they got an army lorry which took about an hour coming, and geez, a pain, I can remember it now. They took me in this lorry all the way to Aldershot, and it was up a bumpy road from the football ground to start with. And it was 3 or 4 hours before it got put back in, so it obviously got weakened tremendously by the weight before it was repaired. And with dislocations, it's always the second time that's the bad time, because if you do it once, maybe it repairs itself. Once you do it the second time, the damage is so great with the hold of the bone and the muscle structure that the dislocation is such that once you've done it the second time, it comes 3, 4, 5, 6 in very quick rotation after that.
And did it get to the stage where it was just being sort of clicked back in and carrying on?
Yeah, sometimes it would go back in and sometimes it wouldn't. You had to get it back pretty quickly. I think there were various types of dislocations, but mine was a dislocation that if you didn't slot it back quickly, you couldn't find the way back in, because it obviously that once it's 30 seconds or a minute, you're then thinking about getting it back in, so you're resisting, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so although sometimes it did go back in quickly, it never went in quickly in a football match, funnily enough. It used to come out and that was it, I couldn't get it back.
So did you actually see the Huddersfield match, or were you?
No, they took me. I didn't always go to the hospital. Sometimes the doctor managed to get it back in at the football ground, and then I'd go and watch the rest of the game.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that once it's back in, the pain has gone. It just aches a bit, but you could quite easily play again because you're not in the pain. But they'd never let me go back on. I used to argue at times because in those days you were down to 10 men. It made a big difference. And of course, unfortunately, at the end they start to say, well, if we put him on the field, we could be 10 men after 5 minutes. So they wouldn't select you, you know. And you'd say, oh, I'll be all right, because you couldn't prove you'd be all right, you see. So at the end of the day, it was really a question of me only playing when there wasn't anybody else available, really. So it did curtail my career, I suppose.
How many performances, how many times did you actually play for Charlton, League and Cup?
It was 263 league, I have to keep reading, so I suppose that is right. Cups, I don't know. It wouldn't have been many. We never had a good run when I was there.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, 12 seasons, maybe 15, no more than 20, I shouldn't have thought.
And you would have more or less started at Charlton, well, soon after you started at Charlton, the South Africans would have started arriving.
No, they were all, Sid O'Lynn was already there. Sid O'Lynn and Dudley Ford were already there. Yeah, and a fellow called Kirsten, I think he was already there. I think there were 4 there. Kirsten, something else. They came in 40, or maybe 47 or beginning of 48, just before I started, I suppose. And then, I mean, we got about 16, 18, 20 South Africans in the end, I suppose.
That many?
Not all at the same time.
Yeah.
But a lot of them would have been at the same time. There was a boy called Ufton who came later, but there was a chap called Nielsen who played on the first team quite a bit, and Newton got the goalkeeper. There probably would have been as many as 12 at one time, I suppose.
So
it would have been half the staff.
Half the team actually on the pitch could have been South African.
Yeah.
That was obviously not very unusual at the time in football in most of the English clubs.
Yeah, we cornered the market. There were South Africans brought over before Charlton did it. I think he got the idea from that. So there was a fellow called Nieuwenhuis, played for Liverpool. I don't know quite if that's the right pronunciation, very long name. But I think he played before the war, very successfully. And there was another guy, and I don't quite know how he got the idea, Jimmy Seed, really. I think he'd been out there and seen some football and thought it was quite good, and somebody said, well, why don't you take this fellow to Sid O'Lynn because he's marvellous, which he wasn't. He played in the first team a lot, but he was one of those who always promised and didn't do it. He had a terrific shot, it went like a bullet, but he only scored about 4 goals a year, you know. He set the crossbar and the goalkeeper saved it. There's a certain knack to scoring goals. I mean, hopefully the boy Williams has got it.
Hopefully Carl Liebman will learn it.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, isn't it, really? Because if he'd get the crowd would get off his back if he got the odd goal. I mean, he puts himself about them so well. He's so available. You know, they can always find him, Lieber.
Yeah, I mean, he's I don't know, to your average supporter, I suppose he just appears to be very awkward, and he's as awkward for his own side as he is for the opponents. But
I mean, I can see that, but the thing is that in a situation like ours, especially the football we play, which is attacking football, home and away. I mean, in fairness to Lenny, he's very brave to do that. Yeah. You don't want the ball coming back at you too quickly because you're bound to be stretched. I mean, Humphreys is stretched all the time. I mean, people grumble about John Humphreys defensively, but
I think
unless he gets a good right-sided player, which Robert Lee has done a bit of a job when he's played there because he can think defensively, which the boy Bennett doesn't quite think defensively. And when he's had people like Milne and I mean other disasters out there, poor John Humphreys is so exposed. Yeah. And when Flanagan stopped playing, he's never had anybody to slot it up there who could keep it a minute or two, so that John Humphreys would have the confidence to follow on. The overlap, because if once Flan finished playing, even with Robert Lee, who's not got bad skills, if he slotted up there, he'd very often lose it. And then John Humphreys is in terrible problems, you know. Back. So the way we play, you don't need the ball coming back too quickly. Now with Lieberman there, high balls, their central defenders don't get them. And if they do get them, they can't get them to head them with power. Yeah. So even Jonesy, he doesn't get every ball in the air, and he's not the greatest jumper. So if he's playing against one of the tall, big central defenders, you'll find the ball keeps coming back at us. Then our central defenders have got to keep turning and running back, which gets you worn out, and Humphries gets exposed, you know. So Leeburn's great in that respect, because they know that if they play high balls, they're invariably flicked on. And if you ask Crooksey, I mean, Crooksey will say, geez, I love playing with this fellow, because he makes openings for me and gives me goal scoring.
Yeah, he's got the knack of sort of chasing it down and turning on it and slotting it off.
But some of his flick-ons are tremendous. I mean, that first game at West Ham, whatever you say about the terrible mistake by the goalkeeper, it was only when Carl even got the measure of Alvin Martin and started flicking them on. Right. Yeah. And then the goal came from that. You know. So, unfortunately, I don't think all the supporters see that about Lever.
Well, because I prefer standing on the terrace to sitting in the stands a lot of the time. Depends on the weather.
Yeah.
Because there's more of an atmosphere, and he's not one of the most unpopular players by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I would say, you know, people are quick to criticise him, but as soon as he does something useful, they'll see it and they'll
I mean, some of his passing is not bad. You see, he can make openings. He has done, hasn't he, for Williams? And
well, that's right. I mean, Williams is. I mean, I think he's been marvellous this season. He is marvellous this season. I mean, it's not only his sort of on the ball stuff; it's his off the ball chasing all the time.
It's his greatest asset of all is that his courage is tremendous around the goal.
Yeah.
Which, if only Robert Lee had that, with the skills that Robert Lee's got, Robert would get goals, you see, but he hasn't got.
I don't know if you saw Tom Morris' sequence of photographs in Mercury last week after his first game. It's three photographs which shows Williams turning round on the, I think it was the Spurs game, one of the Spurs defenders, and sort of defenders sort of trying to push him to begin with, and Williams carries on turning, and the defender ends up going over his back, and then in the end Williams is actually carrying him, and he's still got the ball and he's still running.
Really?
It's
tremendous. He's a revelation, really. I mean, I don't think many of us thought that he would do it at first division level because of that first touch, but even that's improved tremendously. His first touch has come on fabulous. I mean, it's quite easy to go overboard about him, and you wonder whether you're being too quick to do it.
Well, I was getting a bit worried he hadn't scored in a couple of games.
Well, that's right, yeah.
I thought he was bad to be relieved on Saturday when he did again.
Yeah.
But it was beautifully taken, that goal.
Fabulous, because he looked up, placed it, and then hit it with tremendous power, you know. I mean, it really was a good goal.
Anyway, back to your playing days. There were obviously still a lot of the old pre-war players.
Yes. Not the big ones. Don Welsh had just gone, and Slater Brown had gone. I suppose they weren't, funnily enough, because they won the cup in '47, and I went there at the end of '48. So they struggled badly in the league. I mean, they'd nearly got relegated the year I joined, 46, 47. They weren't far off relegation. And the first year I was there, they finished one off relegation. There was only two down in those days. So 47, 48 they struggled. 48, 49 they struggled badly and were lucky to survive. When I got in the side, 49, 50, and we were lucky to survive. And I didn't play 50-51, and they would have gone down, but they got Hans Jepson that year, who got 15 goals in 12 games or something silly, and kept them up. I mean, he really was the salvation. It was amazing. And he only stayed half the season. He'd gone in March, and he lost all the games at the end of March, you know, from March to the end of the season. So they had, a lot of them had departed, and I'm trying to think, pre-war players, I don't think there were too many left. I mean, there was Sammy, obviously, with Bert Turner, the right back, he'd gone. I got to know them because they used to come to the ground sometimes. Hobbes had gone, you know, he was the big star. Tadman, who scored goals in the cup, played in the semi-finals, he'd gone. So there was Chris Duffy was left, but he'd come after the war, and Gordon Hurst was after the war. Les Fell, I think, may have gone before the war. Charlie Rebel, the captain at the time, had played junior before the war, but not really been in the first team. So there weren't really any of the old stars that I'd watched, except Sammy, really. George Robinson played a bit and then became assistant manager, and then Eddie's father-in-law, Eddie from Eddie's father-in-law. So I played with him a bit. But the team was, the first team when I got there would have been Croker, I suppose Peter Croker would have been right back, and Frank Locke had got in at left back, taken over from Shreve, who played before the war, and I played with him a bit. And then right half, I suppose Benny Fenton they bought from Millwall, and Phipps, who played. Well, he hadn't played before the war in the first team, I don't think. No. Left half was Johnson, who'd come during the war, who was quite a star, and Rebel. They shared it a bit. And then it was Les Fell and Gordon Hurst. Dawson, the guy who played in the cup final, he'd gone, I don't know where he went. Lancelot, he went to Brighton. So I think Sid O'Lynn was probably in the first team at inside right. And Charlie Vaughan, who got signed from Sutton after the war, was centre forward. Inside left, could have been anybody, and outside left was Chris Duffy. And then Kiernan got in just before me. He joined with me about the same time. He came from Hong Kong, he'd been in the army. So he got in, and John Huey got in about the same time. Well, he got in after me, but when I went to centre half, I got to centre half. I was started left half, which was always my position. I never ever played centre half. And I got an injury, a thigh injury or something, which kept me out the season. Hans Jepson was there, and I hadn't played very well anyway in the reserves. At the end of the season, I'd got fit again, and they were looking around. Harold Phipps was getting on a bit, you know, and Malcolm they let go because they didn't think he could do it.
Right, there we go.
A fellow there called Jimmy Walls, who was on the fringe of the first team, and he was the next one in, really. And anyway, at the end of the season, for some reason or other, there was a reserve game, and I looked at the sheet, and my name was up at centre half. And I said, gosh, you know, they said, well, it's all right, you know, don't worry, it's just the end of the season and we're just filling in. And we went to Fulham, and we were losing 2-0 at half-time, and I thought, God, I must be having a terrible day. And somebody said, you know, well played, you're doing okay and everything, and we won it 4-2, but I still didn't think I'd done all that well, really. And I think I played there in one other game, I can't remember what it was, and forgot all about it, really. And came back the next season from cricket, and I busted my shoulder up at Blackheath in a cricket match. So I was there right from the start of pre-season training that particular season. And they had practice matches up at the Harveys, which was the training ground in those days. And I'd played left back and right back, and thought, God, you know, I'm really out of this here. Having played in the first team 2 seasons before at left half, I thought I was going to be lucky to get in the third team. And they had a practice match at the Valley only 2 weeks before the season was due to start, I should think. And I wasn't even selected in either the first team or the second team. And I was just sitting on the bench. And we were all sort of, we didn't really have tracksuits in those days, they were tatty old jumpers or something. And I was just sitting there with about 5 or 6 other fellows, and the staff had been reduced by then to about 35. Still, you know,
Still a large squad.
Still a large squad, but it had come down from 48, maybe 32, 35. And Harold Phipps hurt his foot or something, hurt his ankle. So Jimmy Walls went from the reserve team into the first team. And they came down and they said, geez, there isn't a centre half here. So and so. And yelled out to Jimmy Seed, who was in the stand, and said, there isn't anybody who can play, we'll have to shift it around and turn it all around. So he said, well, didn't he play centre half in the reserves last year? So I said, yes, I did. So I went in the reserve side at centre half. And I don't quite remember what happened, but the next trial match was the Saturday before the season started, so that was the official trial match. In those days, they used to open the gates to the public, and they all went to charity. We didn't used to get many there. It was the first team. It was the regular. Every club had that first versus reserve thing. And so I started off in the reserves, and at half time he swapped me around and put me in the first team. And in the, you know, on the Monday he told me I was playing in the first team the following Saturday. So it was a series of events. Harold Phipps, probably getting injured to start with, gave me the opportunity, and he took a chance on the fact of what he'd seen in the practice matches, I suppose.
What was it
That's how he
like
did.
working with Jimmy Seed?
Well, he was terrific. You didn't see too much of Jimmy Seed. I mean, Jimmy Trotter did all the training,
Yeah.
but Jimmy Seed took the pre-match talks, which were always on a Friday, and then you'd see him at the match on the Saturday, but you wouldn't see him any more than that. And in those days, of course, the training was so completely different to what it is now. I mean, your training was just running, and without the ball. The only time you saw the ball was on the Tuesday, a practice match, and 5-minute kickabout before the practice match. And they'd say, you'll be hungry for the football on Saturday. You haven't seen it all, but you'll be hungry for the ball on Saturday. And I could never figure that one out, because I reckon that, and all of us reckoned, that it wasn't just me, we all reckoned that we were professional footballers, and when we were kids and all the time we were learning, and before we joined the club, we played with the ball all the time. As soon as we became professionals, all we did was run and never saw a ball, which we thought was absolutely ridiculous. And it wasn't until 1953 and the Hungarians came over and showed us how to play football, and everybody said, well, how come they are so good? And they used to say, well, because we train with the ball all the time. I mean, Pushka's got the ball and got to the centre spot and kept it up like a juggler, for example. And if we saw the ball, we couldn't hold it up that long. We never practiced, you see, because you never had a ball. And so it wasn't until then that the training started to get a little bit more thought put into it.
So, I mean, were you actually training 5 days a week?
Unless it rained. I mean, if it rained, the coach didn't want to get wet, so he'd send you home. So you could get to the ground at 10 o'clock and they say, no, it's too wet today, so you don't want to train today. So, I mean, it was always football as a misspent youth. You'd be in the cafes or the snooker halls because there wasn't anything else to do. And if you got a job or went to night school and things, you always found that somehow or other you got injured and they'd have you back 3 times a day for treatment, so you couldn't go to the night school or do the other job, so that was always very difficult to do. I mean, it was lovely playing football and I enjoyed it tremendously, but the actual training in my day was a little bit of a waste of time. And it wasn't really organised until probably the 60s, The Hungarians did, as I say, and Walter Winterbottom was very good and brought more thought into the game. But it took the clubs a long time to accept that, really.
It's very surprising, isn't it, when you say, I haven't actually heard that before. You say he didn't train really with the ball, because
he didn't.
You'd think, in any other sport or any other craft, the best way of learning your craft is to practice.
Absolutely. And of course the other big problem was you didn't have training grounds. So all the work you did was on your pitch. I mean, we trained at the Valley all the time. We never trained anywhere else. We'd run around the houses at Blackheath perhaps, but we wouldn't train on another field. And so once the wet weather came and the mud came, they didn't want you to go on the field anyway because the pitch wouldn't be fit for Saturday. So you could imagine there was nowhere to train. You just ran around the cinder track. And then they go bananas because you were cutting the corners all the time.
Were you putting digs when you joined the club?
Well, I live locally, so that didn't apply really. But yes, all the boys were in digs. And I mean, they had dozens of club houses in those days. I mean, literally dozens. I say literally dozens, but they certainly had between 10 and 20 club houses. And I lived in a club house and I got married to start with. And you used to pay 30 shillings a week rent, and that was the going rate. Everybody paid 30 shillings. I remember when I got married at I wanted to buy a house in Danson Road at Welling, at Bexley Heath. And Jimmy C talked me out of it, saying, you're crazy, all you've got to do is pay 30 shillings a week rent when you want to take a mortgage out and all that sort of thing. I mean, he was so wrong, really, in retrospect. I'm not sure that one could criticise too much, because in those days there wasn't inflation, so you'd buy a house and it would still be the same value 5 years later, probably. But at least it was something that was yours, whereas footballers, in those days, you'd come out of the game at 30 and you wouldn't have anything.
There was the maximum wage, wasn't there?
There was a maximum wage.
What were your wages when you started?
7, I suppose. But that you've got to remember that in relation to the ordinary man in the street.
Oh, yeah.
Who wouldn't have earned anywhere near that. I mean, when I came out of the army on 6pence a day or whatever it was, and got £7 a week straight away. I mean, I saved fortunes in relation to everything else, and I was probably earning more than my dad, who was been working all his life.
You'd have bonuses as well.
The bonus was £2 a win and £1 a draw, which added up. and then of course you got a benefit after 5 years. And then they brought in the Provident scheme, which was a big thing, which was 10% to start with, I think, of your wages, and then it was reduced to 8%. But you got that when you were 35, and that was quite a nice nest egg, really. So, you know, it's all in relation. We were very well off in those days. In comparison, not quite like the top ones today, but in comparison.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Certainly. Just to quickly carry on. Your teammates at the time, during your playing career, no doubt there must have been some characters, or the ones who would always make everyone else laugh, or who would you say that they were?
Well, Chris Duffy was a character, I suppose, in lots of ways. He'd scored the goal in the cup final, which was unique because he never ever touched the ball with his right foot, and he scored this sort of belter, as it were, with his right foot, and run the length of the field. But he was a very funny little fellow, and his home life was quite unique in lots of ways, in as much as that he was a Scotsman married to an Irish girl who was very dominant. One would assume, you know, and so it was a great relief for Chris every other week when it was an away match. So Chris's personality would change completely once he got on that coach, knowing that we were off to Newcastle or Blackpool or somewhere marvellous like that, you know. It was a great relief from getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and doing the ironing and scrubbing the doorstep. So Chris was quite a character, because he used to tell us these stories about what had happened to him in the week prior to getting on the coach, you see. And it was like in every walk of life and everything. Charlie Vaughan would have been exactly the opposite, who absolutely hated leaving home. And he wouldn't talk to anybody from the moment we got on the coach until we got back to Charlton 2 days later. And I mean, it was an amazing situation for Charlie, because he was a great fellow and a terrific footballer, who one year I think got 27 goals, 26 of which were at the Valley, and the other one was, you know, probably close by in London somewhere, where we hadn't got to travel. So you got the two complete opposites there in lots of ways. And Billy Kiernan was a character. And, I used to share a room with Billy because you always doubled up, and invariably once you got used to somebody, you would be looking to stay with him rather than having somebody new or whatever, you know. So Billy Kiernan and I virtually doubled up for most of the time.
You'd stay in, they'd always put you in a hotel, and Essex wanted to bring you back.
It was, funnily enough, it was different in those days, in as much as that, you'd go on the Friday most of the time, because there weren't motorways anyway, so the coaches took longer if you went by coach. We travelled by train most of the time. And you stay overnight, and you always had the best, really the best of everything. And you'd always, on the Saturday night on the way back, stop at a hotel or eat on the train, and you'd have a full, complete meal.
And the club would pay for that?
Oh yes, everything was down to the club. But nowadays, of course, it's on the coach and fish and chips, you know. I mean, that's a big turnaround from our day, and it came in gradually, seemingly. But they don't expect now to stop anywhere, and they wouldn't want to stop anywhere, they just want to get home. Whereas we would be very late getting home sometimes, simply because if it was a coach journey, we'd stop at a hotel somewhere. But most of the time we travelled by train, so the diners in those days were, on the long train trips, the meals would be booked on the diners anyway, you know, so that they would definitely be there. Not now, but you know, you'd be lucky if you got on the train where the facilities were there in a way.
Was there a curfew on you on this sort of Friday night?
Oh yeah, well it was a curfew. We always used to go out for walk. Quite amazing, really, the way footballers were treated, I suppose. I mean, they called us slaves, and I think we were in lots of ways. And so yes, there would always be 12 on the trip, never any more, unless it was somebody might be a bit frail and they'd take 13, but very, very unusual to take 13. There'd just be 11 and the reserve, because there weren't subs, so the reserve knew he wasn't playing or anything like And so there'd be 12 players, and you'd always have a meal and always go for a walk after the meal. And the manager would walk at the front, and then there'd be 6 twos, and the trainer would walk at the back in case anybody had tried to escape. And we played Bolton on Christmas, because in those days you played home and away Christmas Day and Boxing Day. And we played Bolton Wanderers at home on Christmas Day, and I was living at Sidcup. And there weren't any trains, and I didn't know till I got to the station there weren't any trains, so I couldn't get there by train, so I thought I'd better get a bus. And there weren't any buses that would connect, you know, because Sidcup to Charlton was a bit of a journey anyway. So I rang the ground and I said, listen, I can't get there, you know, how am I going to get there? So they said, oh, get a taxi. So I didn't get a taxi in Sidcup, where the hell am I going to get a taxi? So they say, oh, you're fine, well, for goodness sake, get down and, you know, quite rightly I suppose, get yourself in. They knew very well I'd get there. I can't quite remember how I got there, but I remember I had 2 different cars and eventually got there, and this was Christmas morning, 11 o'clock kickoff. And the train from Ufton was 3 o'clock, and we got to the station, got to the train, got to the compartment, and it was a really scruffy train, and I remember it to this day, and all dirty, and there wasn't a restaurant car, you see. So, I mean, it was terribly spoiled Christmas Day. So everybody's screaming about, well, where's the food, boss? You know, it was always Jimmy C. got, like Lenny would take the rap. Where's the food? Where's the food? So they got these great big canisters, they use them now, where you open the drawer and there was a sandwich or something, you see, and a bit of cake. So our Christmas lunch that day was sort of a sandwich and a bit of cake and a cup of tea. And the card schools were right in those days. We used to play bridge, I mean, but sometimes we'd play 3-card brag and things. Yeah. But most, with Sammy was, Charlie Vaughan and Benny and I, Billy Kiernan, we used to play bridge, and you know, that was fine. But the others, and myself included, at times you get these card schools which you spend more than you should. So anyway, we got to Manchester and we were staying at the Queen's Hotel, which was the hotel in those days. I'm not even sure it's still there. And we got there, I suppose, about 6 o'clock and had the meal at about 7:30. Excuse me, at 9:30 they said, right, out for the walk, you see. So there we are, in line, column of 2, walking round Manchester on Christmas Day, and there wasn't a soul to be seen until we met 2 girls who were obviously on the game. So they wanted somebody to talk to, and of course Jimmy said, don't talk to them, you can't talk to them. And we were fed up because it was so miserable. Geez, you'd no idea. Christmas Day, everybody was thinking what else they could be doing, and everybody was looking at the houses and the lights. And these 2 poor girls were walking around, and they couldn't find anybody, and they were desperate because they were looking for some money. And I mean, we were a pretty quiet crowd, I suppose, in a way that Chris Duffy might have sort of disappeared, but God, Jimmy Trotter was running up and down counting people like nobody's business. So that was our Christmas Day in Manchester, about 1953, I suppose, something like that. Oh, jeez, it was terrible. And then we just played the next day at Bolton and came back on the train. Yeah.
What about do you have a benefit? Do you have a testimonial?
No, I had 2 benefits. Yeah. I had I think it was £750, and then they bought in the second one. There wasn't a second one, I don't think, in the early days. And then they bought in the second one, and it was £1,000, which I got. I'd spent 12 years there. So I got that, which was taxable. You know, they always used to grumble because theirs was taxable, and the cricketers used to get this benefit. But of course, that wasn't in the contract, which is, the football was in the contract. I mean, that was quite good. Although looking back, I remember Gordon Hurst, the first one, he bought the furniture for his house, I think, with his first benefit. And the second benefit, I said to him, why don't you get a car or something? He said, oh no, I can't afford that. And he was paying 30 bob a week for the house. And I mean, the end of one season, that was a terrible thing. I mean, you'd think you were all right, and then suddenly, I mean, Gordon Hurst was more or less playing in the first team, and they turned around and said, well, they must have thought, well, he won't last another season. And I said, well, that's it, Gordon, you know. And he lived near me actually, and I used to say to him, well, get yourself a club, for goodness sake, it must be a club who'll take you. And they don't want any money for you. I think they'd given him a free, but he took the job of Tunbridge Wells Rangers as player manager, and I mean, that was death, because 2 years there, I mean, what can you do? You win the Kent League, but they want new faces, they want the same fella. You get fed up with the same manager in those lower clubs, you've got no chance of staying there long. But fortunately in the end he got the job as secretary, I think, at Bury. And he went up north. He'd never been, he'd come from up north, but his wife had come from Margate. But he was symptomatic of footballers in those days, where you never knew that you were going to be in work next season, next year, you know. And if they put a fee on your head, you couldn't sign for anybody. I mean, you were out of the game unless somebody paid that money, you know. So I remember a fellow at Chelsea called Danny Winter. They asked for 25,000, and I mean, he just couldn't get a club. Nobody would pay that, so he just had to pack up playing football. He was only about 26 or 27. It's quite ridiculous. And there were dozens of those sort of cases.
What about Benny Fenton? Because he's certainly one of the most popular captains as far as the supporters are concerned, anyway.
Well, he was a terrific character as well. I mean, Benny was a very, very funny man. And a great footballer, but he was an attacking footballer. You know, he wasn't great defensively, really, but a tremendous attacking player and a good captain. I mean, funnily enough, when he became captain, his game became much better. He was a real fly-by-night on the field until he got the responsibility. When he got the responsibility, he was terrific. But I mean, I can't really remember any funny incidents, except one or two that were a little bit over the top. But one of the great stories, two great stories of him, because I used to see him an awful lot after he'd left Charlton, and he became manager at Colchester, player manager at Colchester, and they were playing at Leyton Orient. Was it Colchester?
Sorry, he went to Colchester.
It was Colchester, and they were playing at Leyton Orient, and they were losing 4-0, and Benny picked up the ball on the halfway line, facing his own goal. And you know, sometimes he probably had a little bit of pressure from behind him. And he's trying to turn, and he can't. And he's pushing it back, and suddenly he looks up, and there's the goal in front of him. And he forgot he'd been running the wrong way. Belts it, and it goes straight screaming really in the goal. So they lost 5-0. You know? And Benny raised his hand in triumph before he remembered he was facing the wrong way. And then the other true story about it is that they went to Aldershot and got beaten. They were winning and got beaten in the last 10 minutes. And he'd gone in and he wasn't playing, and he'd gone in and he'd given them a terrific roasting, all the players and everything. And he was so upset, he continued this, and he followed them all to the coach, and he's screaming from the door of the coach, and he said, in fact, he said, I'm not even coming home with you. And he slams the coach door and waves at the coach door, and he probably drives off. And then Benny can't get himself back to Colchester because he hasn't got any money in his pocket. So he had to go and borrow money off Aldershot and Football Club and go and get a train from Aldershot to London, another train from London to Colchester, and they were all back about 5 hours before he was.
That's marvellous. So what did he do? When did he finish with Charlton? Because he was assistant manager, wasn't he?
Yes, and then he went to Denmark, didn't he? As he sort of represented in Denmark when Michael Blikstein was going to, did bring over some Danish players.
Yeah. There were the two, weren't there, that didn't last very long.
That's right, yes.
Therefore, and Eustergaard.
Yeah, I can't remember their names. I can remember seeing them play, but one played in the first team a bit, didn't he?
They never really did anything.
Then we had a Danish coach for a while, didn't we? Well, not a first team coach.
Who is he?
Coached reserves and the juniors for a while, I think.
Yeah.
But that was through Michael Bixting that laid that on. But Benny now, he lives in Wimborne in Dorset and plays bowls. Evidently, he's supposed to be very good.
Yeah.
But I think he's enjoying life. I mean, he's retired. He'd be officially retired now. Yeah.
So when you finished playing, when 1960?
I finished playing 60. Yeah.
And how long were you sort of away from Charlton before you got involved again?
Well, quite a while really, because what happened, I'd always preferred playing cricket. I mean, ever since I can remember, all I wanted to do was play cricket every day. So the football was a little bit of an accident, really. I mean, a lovely accident, but it was something I didn't expect to happen. Never ever thought I'd be good enough. But always hoped I'd be good enough for cricket, really. So I wanted to keep playing cricket, and had 3 more years at cricket. I was a little bit disappointed. I would have wanted to have played longer, but I was sort of the wicket keeper. I never got enough runs at the bat just to play as a bat. So I had Godfrey Evans when I was playing most of the time, and then I got in the side. And then Notty came along, really. I mean, there was another guy called Tony Catt, but I mean, I think if Notty hadn't have come along, I'd have probably have been not still there. I wasn't going to say that, but my career would have gone a little longer. But I'd figured that, I mean, the thing you've got to do all your playing career when you're in sport is remember that you're going to finish, and there's going to be a lot more years, working years in front of you, and you've got to know what you want to do, or try and plan it in some way. And never really be bitter when it finishes if you can help it, because it's going to have to finish sometime, and so you've just got to accept that. So I'd always wanted to have a go at being a football manager. I'd rather have stayed in cricket, but I couldn't see any jobs in cricket that I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a coach. And I didn't really want to be a coach at soccer. I wanted to be a manager. So I finished playing cricket in '63, but from '61 to '64 I was coach at Tooting and Mitcham. Not terribly successfully, but not a failure. I mean, we got in the first round of the FA Cup, which was going right through the qualifying round. And we got to about the 4th round of the Amateur Cup, which they really wanted to win, Tooting, when there was an Amateur Cup. So I'd done reasonably well, and I thought, well, you know, I ought to give it a try if I could. And Malcolm Allison was manager at Bath, and he got the Plymouth Argyle job. And I knew as soon as I saw that he got the job that eventually I'd finish up in Plymouth. It was a feeling I'd got. And I kept saying all these names. He'd asked Noel Campbell to go, and he asked Dave Sexton to go. And they were all saying no. Yeah, I could see it. And he asked about 6 different guys, Jimmy Andrews. And eventually he got round to me, you see. I took him by surprise. And I was living in London and coaching at Tooting and Mitcham. So as soon as he asked me, I said yes. And anyway, I stayed there. But Malcolm was too big for Plymouth, really, especially the first time. And they did very, very well. I mean, they was 3rd in the league at Christmas and got to the semi-final of the League Cup. But Malcolm was too big for the town in so many different ways, football ways. Well, he had problems in as much as that Malcolm was highly, you know, I mean, he was a liver, Malcolm, and I mean, it was a lovely town, and when I say too big for the town, I don't mean as the town, but I mean in the way he lived his life. They didn't understand that type of living. And so eventually he left, not necessarily because of what was happening on the football field, but more because they couldn't understand it. And I mean, I think he was a little bit hurt that I didn't leave at the same time, but we'd had arguments about 1 or 2 of the signings he'd made, and I didn't think that they made a lot of sense. And I mean, one of them was his best friend.
You were his assistant there, right?
So I was his assistant then, And so when he left, I stayed and got the job. So I was there for 4 years altogether, 3.5, just over 3 as manager, I suppose. And we started, we started reasonably. And then we got, the second season I was there, we were sort of doing well, but I'd made a couple of bad buys, really. I'd sold well, but it's easy to sell well, really. If you've got good players, people will buy them. But what I hadn't accounted for was that Plymouth being so out of the way, not everybody wanted to come. And then, funnily enough, once they got there, they either hated it because there were no football matches to see and wanted to get back into football civilization, or they loved it and just wanted to dwell there and sort of relax and enjoy life. But apart from that, I'd figured that there were so many things as a football manager you've got to do right. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of things that nobody really thinks of. And you've got to be right all the way along the line. You can't afford to make mistakes. But above all, you've got to be a very, very good judge of players. Anybody can be a good judge of a good player, and anybody can be a good judge of a bad player. But it's those middle-of-the-road players that you've just got to know whether they've got something that's good for the club or not good for the club. And you've got to put them together, and you've got to read matches, and you've got to see what's happening across the board. And although we'd done well, I wasn't sure that I was getting it quite right, and I don't think I was quite a good enough coach to get what I really wanted the players to give me, you know. So I thought about it, and when it went wrong in the end, and I got the sack, which was justifiable, I decided that I'd try and find something else. And I mean, one of the reasons I found it, I tried desperately hard to get a coach, and couldn't get anybody to go there. You know, like Malcolm had tried very hard to get a coach, because really and truly speaking, what I wanted to be was Jimmy Seed, and just do the matches, buy the players, but not be involved on the day-to-day sort of coaching bit. So I came back to London in '68, having been away since '63, and then I started watching Charlton again. And I'm not sure that I was. I mean, there were 1 or 2 seasons when I thought, "Geez, you know, this is hard to watch because we're not doing this right, not doing that right." But Michael Dixon was very kind, and you know, I used to go in the boardroom and mix, not all the time, but he always gave me tickets. And so I was a regular supporter, and I was a more regular supporter, funnily enough, at the end, like from 78 onwards, I suppose, and I had been from 68 to 78. So when Mark Hullier got involved, you know, I was a regular in a way. And then when Craigsy got the sack and Lenny took over, I saw all of that, and was very impressed with what happened that season on the field, because when Lenny took over they were near bottom, and not a lot of chance of getting out of it, one would have felt, but gradually picked up points. And the last game was Bolton Wanderers at home, which we had to win and they had to win.
Classic Charlton situation.
Yeah, classic Charlton situation, you're right. And Lenny made a substitution that day. It was Gritty in actual fact, who he brought on. But it was one of those where you thought, geez, I wouldn't have taken that fellow off. You know, I mean, I'd have taken that one or that one, but I wouldn't have taken that fellow off. But we won it 4-1, and it doesn't matter whether you agree with what was done or not. It's winning that's the answer, and the manager has to make the decision, and he made the right decision. But that was on top of what he'd done all the season, you know, so that to me was just a clincher. And from then on I thought, well, the guy, you know, he seems to know what he's doing, to have done that, to have kept us in the second division. I thought that was superb. And the following year, of course, was the year that, you know, it all changed a bit, when we nearly died, wasn't it? 84. Well, that must have been Lenny's first season, was it? Anyway, whatever it was, and to me, I mean, each successive season, he's done things which one's got to have great admiration for.
He's had so little touch to work with.
Absolutely, and you know, at times, like every